Welcome to the Deep Sleep channel. Tonight we're telling a story that will challenge everything you believe about human survival. A story about an aeroplane that crashed in the highest mountains on Earth. A story about 45 people who boarded a plane and only 16 who walked out alive. A story about impossible choices and moral courage in the face of death. This is the story of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571. On October 13, 1972, this plane took off from Montevideo, Uruguay, heading to Santiago, Chile. On board were 45 people, including a rugby team, their families, and friends. The flight was routine, the weather was favorable. No one expected tragedy. But over the Andes Mountains, something went terribly wrong. The plane crashed. It crashed in a place where no rescue could reach. It crashed at an altitude where the temperature dropped to 50 degrees below zero. It crashed in a place where there was nothing but snow, ice, and rock for miles in every direction. The survivors found themselves in an impossible situation. They were stranded at 12,000 feet in the Andes Mountains. They had minimal supplies. They had no radio communication with the outside world. They had no way to leave. They were trapped on a mountain that was slowly killing them. For 70 days, these survivors endured unimaginable conditions. They watched their friends die. They faced starvation. They faced avalanches. They faced the crushing knowledge that rescue might never come. And they faced a choice that no person should ever have to make. Close your eyes. Let yourself climb the mountain. Let yourself experience the cold, the hunger, the desperation. Let yourself contemplate what you would do. Let yourself understand the extraordinary lengths humans will go to survive. This is a meditation on survival, on sacrifice, on the bonds of community, and on the moral complexity of living when others are dying. Flight 571 departed from Montevideo on October 12, 1972, in the late afternoon. The plane was a Fairchild FH-227, a twin-engine transport aircraft. It was not a large commercial jetliner, but a smaller, more rugged aircraft. The plane carried 45 people, including the Old Christians rugby team from Uruguay, along with family members and friends who were traveling to Chile for a match. The rugby team was young. Most players were in their teens or early 20s. They were vibrant with the energy of youth. They were excited about the trip. They were looking forward to the match in Santiago. None of them anticipated that this flight would change their lives forever. The flight proceeded normally for several hours. The plane flew south from Uruguay toward Chile. The journey required crossing the Andes Mountains. This was a routine flight that had been made countless times before. The pilots were experienced, the aircraft was reliable, everything seemed normal. But as the plane approached the Andes, the weather began to deteriorate. Clouds obscured the mountains, the visibility decreased. The pilots radioed to air traffic control. They asked for permission to descend to a lower altitude where they might find better visibility. Permission was granted. The pilots began to descend. They thought they were crossing the pass between the mountains. They thought they had cleared the highest peaks. They thought they were safe. But their instruments were not accurate enough. Their navigation was not precise enough. Their assumptions were wrong. 21 p.m. on October 13, 1972, the right wing of the plane struck a mountain peak. The impact was violent. The wing sheared off. The plane began to fall. It descended rapidly, tumbling through the sky. The fuselage broke apart. Seats, cargo, and people were ejected from the plane. The plane struck the mountain again and again as it tumbled down the slope. Finally, the plane came to rest. It was no longer recognizable as an aircraft. It was a shattered tube of metal scattered across the snow. The fuselage was cracked open. The interior was exposed to the elements. Of the 45 people on board, several had been killed instantly in the impact. Many others were severely injured. The survivors found themselves in a nightmare. They were in a wrecked plane at 12,000 feet in the Andes Mountains. The temperature was dropping rapidly. Snow was beginning to fall. The sun was setting. Night would come soon, and with it temperatures that would drop to 50 degrees below zero. The survivors gathered in the fuselage. The plane provided some protection from the wind and cold, but it was minimal. They huddled together for warmth. They tried to take inventory of their supplies. They had some chocolate, they had some wine, they had some other provisions from the plane's galley. But they had no food in any real quantity. They had no camping equipment, they had no survival gear, they had no radio communication with the outside world. The plane's radio was not working, they had no way to call for help. As far as the world was concerned, Flight 571 had simply disappeared. The first night on the mountain was a nightmare. The cold was beyond anything most of them had experienced. People huddled together, trying to share body heat. Many people had serious injuries. Some had broken bones. Some had internal injuries. The medical supplies available were minimal. There was no way to properly treat serious injuries at this altitude. By morning, several more people had died from their injuries. The survivors realized that they were in a dire situation. They were going to have to survive in this place for an extended period. Rescue would take time. It might take weeks. They needed to figure out how to survive. The survivors took inventory of what they had. They found some food in the plane's galley. They found some blankets and cushions from seats that could be used for insulation. They found some wine, but their supplies were severely limited. They had enough food for a few days at most if they rationed carefully. After that, they would be facing starvation. The survivors organized themselves. They designated certain people to manage food supplies. They designated others to organize shelter and maintain the fire. They tried to create structure and order in a chaotic and desperate situation. This organization would prove crucial to their survival. Days passed. More people died from injuries and exposure. The survivors watched their friends die. They watched teammates, family members, and friends succumb to the cold and their injuries. Each death was traumatic. Each death made the situation more desperate. The survivors began to understand something that was difficult to accept. They were going to have to make a choice that was morally and psychologically devastating. Their food supplies were running out. They had no way to leave the mountain. They would eventually face starvation, but there was an alternative. The plane was surrounded by bodies. The dead could provide sustenance. It was a horrifying option. It violated every taboo against cannibalism. But it was also the only way to survive. The survivors discussed this possibility. They debated it. Many of them had religious objections. All of them had visceral objections. The idea of eating human flesh was repugnant, but the alternative was death. In the end, survival instinct prevailed over taboo. The survivors decided that they would eat the bodies of those who had died. They told themselves that the dead were no longer using their bodies. They told themselves that their friends would have wanted them to survive. They told themselves that they had no choice. The first time they consumed human flesh, many of the survivors wept. The act was psychologically devastating, even as it was physically necessary. As weeks passed, the survivors faced other challenges beyond hunger and cold. They had to deal with avalanches. The mountains were unstable. Snow would accumulate and then suddenly cascade down the mountainside. The survivors had to constantly monitor the snow and try to position themselves to avoid being buried. One of the most devastating avalanches occurred on October 29th, 16 days after the crash. An enormous wave of snow came down the mountain. It swept across the fuselage. 8 of the survivors were buried under snow. The others dug frantically, trying to rescue their buried companions. They managed to save most of them, but one man, a doctor named Humberto Valenzuela, suffocated under the snow. Another survivor died from suffocation in the avalanche as well. The avalanche was a turning point for many survivors. It reinforced the reality of their situation. The mountain was not just cold and barren, it was actively trying to kill them. Every moment they were at risk. Every night they wondered if they would survive to see the morning. The survivors also had to deal with despair. As weeks turned into a month, and then 6 weeks, hope began to fade. Rescue seemed increasingly unlikely. The search teams on the ground had called off the search after 8 days. The survivors didn't know this, but they could sense it. They could feel that no one was coming to save them. At 6 weeks, some of the survivors decided that they had to try to leave the mountain. They couldn't stay in the fuselage forever. They had to try to reach help. But leaving the mountain was an enormous risk. The survivors were weakened from lack of food and the harsh conditions. The mountains were impassable. No one was equipped for mountaineering. But staying meant certain death. Leaving meant at least a chance. A small group of survivors decided to attempt to climb down the mountain. They prepared carefully. They rationed their remaining food supplies. They tried to assess which direction offered the best chance of reaching human settlement. 3 survivors began the descent on December 12, 70 days after the crash. They climbed down the mountain, following what they thought was the best route. The climb was agonizing. They were weak, they were tired, they were cold, but they persisted. After 3 days, these 3 survivors encountered a man on horseback. The man was a shepherd. He helped them. He provided them with food and water. He helped them reach a village. Through this contact, rescue was organized. On December 16th, rescue helicopters reached the crash site. They began to evacuate the remaining survivors. Over several days, all of the surviving 16 were rescued. They were brought down from the mountain. They received medical attention. They began their recovery. But the ordeal was not over. The survivors had to face the world. They had to deal with the fact that their survival came through cannibalism. This fact became public knowledge. The survivors faced intense media scrutiny. Some people condemned them for what they had done. Others celebrated their survival. The survivors themselves struggled with the moral and psychological weight of their choices. In the years after the crash, the survivors wrote books and gave interviews about their experience. They spoke about the decisions they had made. They spoke about the sacrifice of those who had died. They came to terms with what they had done. Most of the survivors came to believe that they had done what was necessary. They believed that their friends who had died would have wanted them to live. They believed that in an impossible situation, they had made the best choice available to them. Not a good choice, but the best possible choice given the circumstances. The survivors also came to understand something profound about the human condition. When facing death, people are capable of extraordinary things. They are capable of overcoming taboos. They are capable of making choices that would be unthinkable in normal circumstances. They are capable of enduring conditions that should be fatal. The human spirit is capable of resilience beyond imagination. The story of Flight 571 became one of the most famous survival stories in history. A book was written about it called Alive. A movie was made based on the book. The story has been told and retold countless times. It has inspired people around the world. But beyond the fame and the stories, the event had a profound impact on the survivors themselves. They had been through something that would shape the rest of their lives. They had faced death and chosen to survive. They had made impossible choices. They had endured unimaginable conditions. Some of the survivors struggled with the aftermath. The psychological trauma was severe. Some experienced depression. Some experienced nightmares. Some struggled with guilt that they had survived when others had not. But many of the survivors eventually moved forward. They built lives. They had families. They worked. They lived. One of the most remarkable aspects of the survival story was the unity and mutual support among the survival. The survivors did not survive alone. They survived together. They supported each other. They maintained bonds of friendship even in the darkest circumstances. These bonds were as important to their survival as food and shelter. Fourth, that the human spirit is more powerful than physical circumstances. Even in a situation that was objectively hopeless, the survivors maintained hope. They maintained the will to live. They refused to give up. This psychological strength was crucial to their physical survival. Fifth, that traumatic experiences change us. The survivors of Flight 571 were changed by their experience. They were changed by what they endured and by the choices they made. But many of them came to believe that the experience also taught them something valuable about life and about human resilience. Sleep knowing that humans are capable of extraordinary resilience. Sleep knowing that even in the darkest circumstances, survival is possible. Sleep knowing that community and mutual support can sustain us through anything. Sleep knowing that the human spirit is more powerful than we often realize. Sleep knowing that the story of Flight 571 is real. That these events actually happened. That people really did survive 70 days on a mountain. That people really made the choice to eat human flesh to survive. That the human capacity for resilience and sacrifice is real. Sleep peacefully, contemplating the story of survival against impossible odds. Sleep with gratitude for the safety and comfort of your situation. Sleep with appreciation for the strength of the human spirit. Good night from the Deep Sleep Channel. Sleep well and appreciate the incredible resilience of humans in the face of disaster.